a 48% grade, a bridge 335 feet above a tropical gorge with no side barriers, a train where 10,000 passengers cling to the roof beneath high-voltage power lines. Across 6 continents, railways push through conditions that make paved highways look like sidewalks. The numbers alone should have shut these lines down decades ago. They didn't. The trains still run. And the routes you are about to cross were not built for comfort. They were built because there was no other way. Maeklong Railway Market, Thailand. 8 times every day, a 100-ton diesel locomotive rolls straight through the middle of an open-air food market with no barriers, no warning lights, and no automatic gates. The Maeklong Railway Market sits directly on active tracks in Samut Songkhram province. The gap between the train's steel body and the nearest vendor stall measures roughly 12 inches on each side. When a distant horn sounds, sellers have about 90 seconds to act. Awnings retract, tables fold, baskets of fish, fruit, and spices slide backward on small wheels bolted to wooden platforms. Shoppers press flat against storefront walls. Then the train passes close enough to brush their sleeves. The track runs for about 300 feet through the market's densest section. No fencing separates raw produce from iron wheels. Some goods, stacked too close or caught on an edge, get clipped. One slow reaction from a vendor means crushed inventory. One misstep from a tourist means direct contact with a locomotive that cannot stop in this distance. This market has operated on these tracks since 1905. When the railway was extended through the area, local vendors refused to relocate. Generations later, their descendants still sell on the same rails. For them, this is not spectacle. It is routine so deeply practiced that children here learn to read the train whistle before they learn to read words. The sensory hit is total. You smell charcoal smoke and fresh lemongrass. You hear the rails vibrate beneath your feet 10 seconds before you hear the horn. Then the locomotive fills your entire visual field. So close the heat off the engine warms your face. If any seller's wheel cart jams or any tourist freezes in the wrong spot, the train has no room to swerve and not enough distance to brake. The margin between a normal Tuesday and a catastrophe is less than 1 foot and less than 1 minute. Yet this scene has repeated roughly 30,000 times over the last decade without a single major recorded fatality in the market zone. What happens when a railway runs through a neighborhood where people refuse to move and instead learn to move around it? If that 12-inch margin sounds tight, leave a comment telling us whether you'd stand in that gap or watch from a safe distance. One tap on subscribe means you won't miss what comes next. Hanoi Train Street, Vietnam. In the old quarter of Hanoi, a railway squeezes through a residential corridor so narrow that the distance from house walls to rail is just 4.9 feet. When the train passes, barely 15 inches remain between the steel carriage and front doors where families eat dinner. The scene looks almost staged. Potted plants line the tracks. Laundry hangs overhead. Cafe chairs sit on the rail bed. Then, 5 minutes before arrival, a whistle blows. Owners drag tables inside. Tourists stand flush against brick walls. And a full-size passenger train slides through at walking speed, filling the corridor completely. This stretch runs through a neighborhood where roughly 100 households live within arm's reach of the tracks. The railway was built during French colonial rule in the early 1900s, and homes grew around it decade after decade until the corridor became one of the tightest active rail passages on Earth. Residents turned this danger into livelihood. Coffee shops popped up along the tracks, charging tourists for the experience of feeling train wind on their faces. The heat radiating from beneath the carriages rises in a wave you feel from your ankles to your chest. The vibration of the ground is so strong that drinks rattle off tables if they aren't pulled back in time. Vietnamese authorities have ordered these cafes closed multiple times, citing railway safety regulations. Each time, the shops reopen in slightly altered form. The economic pull is too strong and the fame too widespread to contain permanently. The stakes are simple and physical. At 15 inches of clearance, a single extended arm, a stumble, or a dropped phone retrieved at the wrong second puts a human body in direct contact with a passing train. No safety net exists. No barrier can be installed. The buildings are the barrier, and they're on both sides. Somewhere farther down this list, a railway does not just squeeze past walls. It punches straight through a waterfall. FCAB Railway, Atacama Desert, Chile. In the driest place on Earth, a freight railway crosses 900 miles of terrain where some soil patches have never recorded a single drop of rain. The FCAB line threads through the Atacama Desert in Chile, moving lithium and copper through a landscape where NASA tests Mars rovers, because conditions here are the closest match to the red planet found anywhere on this globe. The ground along the route glows deep red under a sun that drives surface temperatures past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists from Washington University confirmed that in certain zones beside the tracks, even bacteria cannot survive in the soil. The word barren does not begin to cover it. For stretches of 100 miles or more, the train is the only moving object visible in any direction. FCAB hauls industrial freight, not tourists, not passengers. Its cars carry lithium bound for batteries in American electric vehicles and copper destined for global electronics supply chains. This railway is a critical artery for the lithium triangle, the region producing over half the world's lithium supply. Dozens of stations along the route now stand completely abandoned. Their platforms are buried under red dust. Their signs are bleached unreadable. No town exists near them anymore. The railway outlasted the settlements it was built to serve. For the engineers and conductors who operate this line, breakdowns are existential. There is no self-service across most of the route. No roadside assistance exists because there are no roads. A mechanical failure in the wrong section means waiting in 120-degree heat until a rescue locomotive arrives from a depot that could be 8 hours away. The isolation is a danger. When the Atacama turns hostile, there is nothing within visual range that can help a human being stay alive. And yet this railway moves millions of tons of raw material through the void every single year, because the modern world literally runs on what it carries. Most people never think about where the lithium in their phone battery comes from. If this one made you think about it differently, a simple like helps more people see it. Shaka Salt Lake Railway, China. At 10,170 feet above sea level, a narrow gauge railway runs straight into the center of Salt Lake, so perfectly flat that it mirrors the sky and erases the horizon line. Shaka Salt Lake in Qinghai province holds what might be the most surreal active rail line in China, a 24-inch wide track originally built to extract pure mineral salt from the lake bed. The rails sit just inches above the water surface. On calm days, the reflection is so complete that the train appears to float in open sky. Passengers on the small rail cars look down and see clouds beneath their feet. The visual effect is disorienting. Your brain cannot process where the water ends and the air begins. This railway was built for industrial salt harvesting, not tourism. Workers rode it daily to reach extraction points deep in the lake, loading rail cars with crystallized salt scraped directly from the basin floor. When visitors discovered the mirror effect, the line's purpose shifted. Now it carries thousands of tourists each year into the center of what locals call China's Sky Mirror. But beauty here carries a chemical edge. The salt concentration in Shaka Lake is high enough to corrode exposed metal within days. Electronic devices dropped into the water are often destroyed instantly. The rail infrastructure requires constant maintenance because salt crystals build up on the tracks and deform the steel gauge. At this altitude, the air holds 30% less oxygen than at sea level. Visitors frequently experience headaches, dizziness, and shortness of breath. The combination of altitude sickness and the disorienting mirror effect has caused tourists to lose balance and fall from the rail platforms into the shallow brine. The railway looks like it belongs in a dream, but every mechanical joint, every steel rail, and every human lung up here fights against an environment that quietly destroys anything it touches. This track floats above a mirror, but ahead, another railway crosses a lake so large it turns two different colors and stretches longer than any rail causeway on Earth. Great Salt Lake Causeway, Utah, USA. The longest railroad causeway over water in the world cuts 12 miles straight across Utah's Great Salt Lake, and the view from the train splits reality in half. Out one window, the water glows blue-green. Out the other, it shimmers vivid pink-purple. The same lake, the same train. Two completely different worlds separated by the rock bed you are riding on. This color split is not natural. The causeway itself caused it. When Union Pacific completed the solid rockfill replacement in 1959, the structure blocked water circulation between the lake's north and south arms. Different salinity levels developed on each side, feeding different species of algae and brine shrimp. The result is a permanent biological divide visible from space. Building this crossing required dumping more than 36 million cubic meters of rock, sand, and gravel into the lake bed. The original 1904 structure was a massive wooden trestle, 12 miles of timber pilings driven into mud. By mid-century, the weight demands of modern freight made it impossible, and the entire structure was rebuilt in earth and stone. Today, freight trains stretching over a mile long cross this causeway daily. Each one carries thousands of tons linking goods from the American East Coast to the Pacific ports. The causeway cut the original route by 44 miles and eliminated severe mountain grades, saving the railroad millions annually. The danger is subtle but constant. The lake bed beneath the causeway is soft sediment. High water years push waves against the rock fill, eroding its edges. In storms, wind across the open water generates swells strong enough to splash over tracks and reduce visibility to near zero for locomotive engineers traveling at full speed. A single infrastructure failure here would sever one of America's most critical freight corridors. And most Americans drive past the Great Salt Lake without ever knowing that a 12-mile railway holding the country's supply chain together runs straight through its center. If you've ever driven Interstate 80 past this lake and never knew this causeway existed beneath those trains, drop a like, because this is the kind of detail most channels never dig into. Lake Baskinchak, Salt Train, Russia. Every piece of metal on this railway is being slowly eaten alive. The salt train at Lake Baskinchak in southern Russia operates with its entire rail system submerged beneath a salt lake where salinity reaches 300 grams per liter, roughly 10 times south than the ocean. The locomotive does not ride above the lake. It rides through it. Rails, wheels, axles, and undercarriage sit in direct contact with brine that corrodes steel faster than almost any natural environment on Earth. The train pulls a massive machine called a salt harvester, which scrapes crystallized salt from the lake bottom and loads it directly into open rail cars. This lake produces tens of thousands of tons of table salt every year. It has been a salt source for centuries, and the rail system was built specifically to mechanize extraction across the lake's vast flat bed. No roads reach the harvesting zones. The train is the only way in and the only way out. Salt deposits accumulate on the tracks so heavily that rails deform into unrecognizable shapes. Ties become encased in crystalline formations that look more like cave stalactites than railroad infrastructure. Maintenance crews scrape, replace, and rebuild track sections constantly, knowing that within weeks, the salt will reclaim what they repaired. Standing near the shore, you hear the train before you see it. The sound is wrong, a grinding, crunching tone that normal trains do not make. The wheels push through a surface that is half liquid and half mineral crust. White salt spray kicks up behind the cars like a rooster tail on a speedboat. If the harvester's mechanical arm jams at the wrong angle, the entire train can derail into the soft lake bed with no solid ground beneath it to stop the slide. Recovery in those conditions means sending another locomotive into the same corrosive water to pull the wreck free. This lake dissolves the very machines built to harvest it, but the railway still runs because the salt it produces feeds an industry worth millions. The harshest conditions for a railway are not always chemical. Sometimes the enemy is altitude, ice, and wind strong enough to erase a train from view in seconds. Gornergrat Railway, Switzerland. At 10,130 feet, the Gornergrat Railway holds the title of highest open-air cogwheel railway in Europe. The final station sits above the permanent snow line, where oxygen is thin. Temperatures plunge below minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit in winter, and weather shifts from full sunlight to whiteout blizzard in under 5 minutes. The train climbs 4,590 vertical feet in just 5.6 miles. To manage grades up to 20%, it uses the ABT rack and pinion system, a toothed rail between the standard tracks that meshes with the gear beneath the locomotive. Without it, wheels would spin uselessly on ice-covered steel. This line operates year-round. That is not a scheduling note. It is an engineering statement. When winter storms bury the tracks under feet of snow, specialized plows and heated rail switches keep the route open. The railway has operated continuously since 1898, surviving over 125 alpine winters. Passengers board in the resort town of Zermatt at 5,300 feet, surrounded by green meadows. 33 minutes later, they step out into a frozen world where the Matterhorn fills the horizon and glaciers stretch in every direction. The temperature drop during the ride can exceed 30 degrees. The sensory shift is almost violent. Your ears pop, your breathing shortens. Your exposed skin stings in wind that cuts across the open observation platforms. The train moves at roughly 9 miles per hour, slow enough that every detail of the frozen landscape registers, and fast enough that the cold never lets you forget where you are. If mechanical failure strands a train above the snow line, passengers face altitude, exposure, and temperatures that can cause hypothermia within an hour. Rescue by road is impossible. Rescue by helicopter depends entirely on whether that changes without warning. The Gornergrat proves that extreme altitude railways are not relics. They are active systems that push human engineering against conditions nature never invited us into. Imagine a train with no driver, hanging from a rail in midair, with a glass floor showing the drop beneath your feet. It exists, and it is coming up next. Optics Valley Suspension Railway, China. The first commercial suspended railway in China hangs passengers beneath an elevated rail with nothing but a transparent glass floor between their feet and the open air below. The Optics Valley Line in Wuhan runs 6.5 miles from the Fangshan Mountain to Longquanshan Mountain, crossing urban districts and green corridors, while the train dangles from above like a cable car on a fixed track. The cars reach speeds up to 37 miles per hour while suspended. Despite hanging in the air, the ride is engineered for minimal vibration, smooth enough that a cup of water on the floor barely ripples. But smoothness does not remove the psychological impact of looking straight down through glass at a drop of several dozen feet, with no solid ground visible anywhere beneath the cabin. This train has no human driver. The entire system is controlled by artificial intelligence. Acceleration, braking, speed adjustment, and station stops are managed autonomously. No conductor sits in the front cabin. No manual override is available to passengers. The engineering is advanced, but the failure scenario is what stays with you. If the AI system experiences a critical error, or the power grid feeding the line goes down, the train stops in place, suspended above the ground. Passengers cannot exit. They cannot descend. They wait, hanging in a glass-floored cabin, until rescue teams arrive with specialized equipment designed to extract them from the elevated rail structure. Wuhan residents ride this line daily for commuting. For them, the glass floor is routine. But first-time riders frequently grip handrails with white knuckles as the city passes beneath their feet with nothing between them and gravity except engineered trust. The sensation is immediate and involuntary. Your stomach drops the moment the floor becomes transparent. Your legs stiffen. Your eyes search for solid ground and find only air. A train controlled entirely by AI, with no human override, carrying passengers above open space. The future of rail is already here, and it asks you to trust the machine completely. If a glass floor above a city makes your stomach drop, consider this. The next entry hangs passengers above a 207-foot abyss at nearly 14,000 feet of altitude, with nothing but open wind outside the window frame. Tren a los Nubes, train to the clouds, Argentina. At 13,845 feet above sea level, the train to the clouds crosses the La Polverilla Viaduct, a steel bridge so high and so exposed that passengers involuntarily hold their breath when they look down. The drop below the rails measures 207 feet straight into an Andean gorge. The bridge weighs 1,764 tons. And the wind at this altitude does not blow, it shoves. The viaduct stands among the highest railway bridges in the world. The train reaches it after climbing through 21 tunnels, 13 viaducts, and a series of zigzag switchbacks carved into the Andes between Salta and the Chilean border. The total route covers about 134 miles and gains over 10,000 feet of elevation. At this height, the air holds roughly 40% less oxygen than at sea level. Every train carries a dedicated car stocked with medical-grade oxygen tanks and staffed by doctors. Altitude sickness strikes fast, headaches, nausea, disorientation, and in severe cases, pulmonary edema, where fluid fills the lungs. When the train stops on the viaduct, passengers step to the open windows. Through the empty frames, with no glass, you feel the bridge vibrate beneath you. The metal groans under thermal expansion. Wind gusts hit your face, carrying dry Andean dust. Looking straight down, your eyes find nothing solid for 207 feet, just rock, shadow, and the thin thread of a river far below. Many passengers participate in a brief ceremony on the bridge, where the Argentine national anthem plays, and the flag moves in the open wind above the gorge. It is a moment of national pride mixed with genuine physical unease. The human body was not designed to function at 13,845 feet. The train carries oxygen because without it, the journey itself becomes a medical emergency. And yet thousands of passengers ride this line every season, trading comfort for the experience of floating above an abyss in thin air. Standing at 207 feet above a gorge with oxygen tanks on board is extreme. But the next railway climbs even steeper, on a grade so intense that passengers in the front row sit 14 feet higher than those in the back. Mount Washington Cog Railway, USA. The second steepest cog railway in the world climbs the northeast face of Mount Washington in New Hampshire, tackling a maximum grade of 37.41% on the section called Jacob's Ladder. At that angle, the height difference inside a single rail car is dramatic. Passengers in the front row sit roughly 14 feet higher than those in the back row of the same carriage. The track covers about 3 miles from base to summit. The trip takes approximately 45 minutes, which means the train moves at close to walking speed. That slowness is not a comfort measure. It is a survival requirement. The cog system, a toothed gear rail invented by Sylvester Marsh in the 1860s, is the only thing preventing the train from sliding backward down the mountain. When Marsh first proposed a railway, he was ridiculed so thoroughly that critics told him he might as well apply for permission to build a railway to the moon. He built it anyway. The line opened in 1869 and has operated in some form for over 155 years. Mount Washington holds a record for the worst weather ever directly observed on Earth's surface. A wind speed of 231 miles per hour was recorded at the summit in 1934. The peak sits in the path of 3 major storm tracks, creating conditions that shift from calm to deadly within minutes. Riding up Jacob's Ladder, you feel the angle in your body before you see it in the landscape. Your weight shifts hard against the seat back. The car tilts at an incline steep enough that standing feels unstable. Through the window, the mountainside drops away at a pitch that tricks your brain into thinking the train is tipping backward. If the cog system fails on Jacob's Ladder, gravity takes over instantly. There is no flat section to coast onto, no runaway ramp, just a 37% grade and a mountain that will not negotiate. If that grade sounds extreme, the railway ahead holds a world record, steeper than Mount Washington by a full 10 percentage points. Populated Railway, Switzerland. The steepest cogwheel railway on Earth maxes out at a 48% grade on the rocky face of Mount Pilatus near Lucerne, Switzerland. At that angle, the train is closer to an elevator than a conventional railway. 1 degree steeper and the mechanical limit of rack rail technology would be exceeded entirely. The locker rack system used here is found nowhere else in the world. Unlike standard cog railways that mesh a vertical toothed rail, the Pilatus system grips a horizontal rack from both sides, locking the train to the track with mechanical force that prevents it from tipping, sliding, or derailing on an extreme slope. The line opened with steam power in 1889 and was electrified in 1937. The original locker mechanism was kept through conversion because no alternative system could handle the grade. The bright red cars, painted contrast sharply against gray limestone and white snow, climb 5,350 feet over roughly 2.8 miles of track. Riding upward, your body registers the incline as wrong. The floor tilts beneath your feet at an angle steeper than most staircases. The large, low-set windows force your eyes outward and downward, where the rock face drops away at a pitch your inner ear cannot reconcile with the sensation of sitting in a train car. Heavy snowfall and avalanche risk close this railway every winter. It operates only from May through November. During operating months, fog can roll in without warning, reducing visibility to zero and turning the mountain into a gray void outside the windows. If the locker mechanism were to fail mid-climb, the car would slide backward on a 48% slope with no secondary braking system capable of holding the weight. The runout zone below is rock, not meadow. For over 130 years, this system has never experienced that failure. But every ride is an act of trust in a 19th century mechanism operating at the absolute boundary of what gears and steel can physically do. A railway this steep redefines what you think a train can climb. But the route coming next redefines what a train can survive, because it crosses an international border on a frozen mountain pass where the abyss below the bridge has no bottom you can see. If the thought of 48% grade makes your palms sweat, tell us in the comments, would you ride Pilatus with your eyes open or closed? A quick subscribe keeps you locked in for what's ahead. White Pass and Yukon Route, Alaska/Canada. Built in 26 months during the 1898 Klondike Gold Rush, the White Pass and Yukon Route climbs 2,865 feet in just 20 miles through granite cliffs so massive that engineers had to blast through solid rock faces hundreds of feet high. This is one of the few train rides on Earth that requires a passport. The track crosses the international border between the United States and Canada at the summit of White Pass. The construction killed at least 35 workers in conditions so extreme that many laborers deserted mid-project. Blasting crews carved ledges into vertical cliff walls using black powder and hand drills. Bridges were erected over gorges in winter storms where wind chill dropped well below minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The most terrifying moment comes at Dead Horse Gulch, where a steel cantilever bridge spans a gorge so deep that the bottom vanishes into shadow. The bridge sits at the exact point where, during the gold rush, over 3,000 pack horses died from exhaustion, abuse, and falls, giving the gorge its name. Unlike modern enclosed trains, the White Pass route features open platform cars. You stand on the rear deck with no glass between you and the mountain. Freezing air hits you at full force. Granite walls pass within inches of the railing. The sound of steel wheels on narrow gauge track echoes off the canyon walls and returns amplified. Looking down from the open platform at Dead Horse Gulch, your brain processes the depth in stages. First the rock walls, then the tree line far below, then the river, a thin silver line that tells you the true distance. Your hands tighten on the rail involuntarily. If a section of the century-old track bed shifts in freeze-thaw cycles, the narrow gauge offers almost no margin for correction. The train stays on the rail or it doesn't. At these heights, there is no middle outcome. This route was mocked as impossible before it was built. What comes next is a bridge where the danger is not the height or the cold, but a cyclone strong enough to throw an entire train into the sea. Most channels cover tourist railways. This one required dynamite, 35 dead workers, and a passport. If that level of depth is what you come here for, one tap on like tells the algorithm to show this to more people who think the same way. Pumban Bridge Railway, India. In 1964, a cyclone hit the Palk Strait with enough force to blow a fully loaded passenger train off the Pumban Bridge and into the Indian Ocean. The disaster killed 150 people and proved what engineers had warned since the bridge opened in 1914. This crossing sits in one of the most cyclone-vulnerable corridors on Earth. Pumban Bridge connects the Indian mainland to Rameswaram Island across 6,776 feet of open sea. The track runs on a steel truss structure built more than 110 years ago, and the centerpiece is a Scherzer rolling bascule span, a section that lifts open in two vertical halves to allow ships to pass directly through the middle of the railway. Crossing the bridge, the view is nothing but water. The Indian Ocean stretches to the horizon on both sides. The sky and sea merge into a single band of blue, and the thin rail line beneath your wheels is the only visible structure in any direction. The sensation is not of riding a train. It is of floating on a steel thread above open ocean. Salt-laden winds corrode the century-old steel constantly. Maintenance crews repaint and reinforce sections year-round, racing against oxidation that never pauses. Because of this corrosion and the wind exposure, trains are restricted to roughly 6 to 9 miles per hour on the bridge. At that speed, Passengers feel every vibration of the aging structure through the floor and the seat frame. The 1964 disaster was not a freak event. This straight channels cyclonic winds into a natural funnel. Storm surges push seawater over the bridge deck. High wind shutdowns happen multiple times each monsoon season, stranding passengers on either side with no timeline for reopening. Despite all of it, this remains the only rail link to Rameswaram, a major pilgrimage destination visited by millions of Hindu devotees each year. For them, there is no alternative route. The bridge is a path, or there is no path. A cyclone once threw a train into the sea here. That is documented history, not legend. If stories like this deserve to be heard, a share sends it to someone who needs to see it. Konkan Railway at Dutsagar Falls, India. A train passes through the center of a waterfall that stands 1,017 feet tall, one of the tallest in India. The Konkan Railway line crosses Dutsagar Falls in Goa during monsoon season, and the visual is almost impossible to process. The cascade is so massive and so white that locals named it the Sea of Milk. The train enters a spray, looking like it is flying through a cloud. The railway was routed through this section because the Western Ghats offered no gentler alternative. Engineers reinforced the mountainside with thousands of cubic meters of steel mesh, retaining walls, and drainage channels to keep the track stable against the water's relentless force. During peak monsoon, the falls produce a spray zone that extends hundreds of feet in every direction. Passengers who open the train windows at this point get hit directly in the face by waterfall mist. The force of the spray is strong enough to soak clothes instantly. The roar of falling water drowns out the train's engine. For a few seconds, the world outside the carriage disappears into white noise and white water. But this beauty sits on top of serious engineering danger. The Western Ghats receive some of India's heaviest rainfall. Landslides and rockfalls are common during monsoon months. The Konkan Railway Authority operates a separate monsoon timetable with reduced speeds, additional track inspections, and emergency protocols activated for every journey through the mountain sections. In 2023, a major landslide blocked a section of the Konkan route, stranding hundreds of passengers and requiring multi-day rescue operations. The terrain is so steep and so densely forested that road access to many sections simply does not exist. The waterfall will not stop. The monsoon will not stop. And the railway cannot reroute because the mountains do not permit it. Every crossing through Dutsagar is a negotiation between human infrastructure and a geological force that has been carving this gorge for millennia. There is nowhere else on Earth where you can open a train window and feel a 1,000-foot waterfall hit your face. If that image stays with you, a like makes sure more people discover it. Tian Shan Canyon Railway, Kuka Section, China. The red sandstone walls of the Tian Shan Canyon absorb sound so completely that standing between them feels like the earth has muted itself. Then a coal train carrying thousands of tons rounds a curve and the silence shatters. This railway through the Kuka section of Xinjiang province cuts between canyon walls made of red sandstone with almost no structural cohesion. The geology is simple and terrifying. The rock is hard when dry, but crumbles like a dry cracker when exposed to water or vibration. A single heavy rainstorm can trigger rockfalls that scatter boulders across the tracks without warning. The trains here are not lightweight passenger cars. They are dedicated coal freight trains, each one pulling dozens of cars weighing thousands of tons combined. The vibration from these loads transfers directly into the canyon walls. Engineers have documented how repeated train passages loosen sandstone blocks that later fall in delayed collapses, sometimes hours after the train has passed. The route opens for only 4 to 5 months each year. The combination of flash flood risk, extreme summer heat, and winter snow closures compresses the operational window into a narrow season. Filmmakers and photographers who want to capture the image of a long, cold train bending through red cliffs must time their visits precisely and wait for hours at specific vantage points. When you stand in the canyon, the red walls rise hundreds of feet on both sides. The light filters through an orange shafts. The air is still and dry and smells like mineral dust. Then the ground begins to vibrate, and you feel the train before you hear it. A low hum that builds until the locomotive appears around a sandstone curve like a steel snake entering a painted cathedral. One miscalculated rain event during operating season, can send a wall section onto the tracks while a loaded train is in the canyon. No evacuation route exists. The canyon is the route, what the Tian Shan Canyon hides behind beauty. The next bridge reveals with pure exposed height, a steel structure crossing a tropical gorge at 335 feet with no side rails and no safety net. Goktaek Viaduct, Myanmar. When the Goktaek Viaduct was completed in 1900, it was the tallest railway bridge on Earth. The structure stands 335 feet above a tropical gorge, roughly the height of a 30-story building, and stretches 2,257 feet across a ravine so deep that the river below looks like a pencil line drawn on green paper. The entire bridge was assembled with rivets and bolts. No welding, no modern adhesives. More than a century of monsoon rain, tropical heat, and mechanical stress has been carried by a lattice of steel members pinned together by hand by workers who stood on narrow beams 300 feet above the jungle floor. Trains cross at enforced speed close to walking pace, roughly 3 to 4 miles per hour. This restriction is not for the passenger experience. It exists because faster speeds would generate bending stress and harmonic vibration that the aging steel cannot safely absorb. At walking speed, the crossing takes nearly 15 minutes. Every second of those 15 minutes, the gorge is visible through the train windows with no high side barriers blocking the view. The sensation is disorienting. The train moves so slowly that it feels stationary. But the landscape outside moves, the gorge walls, the canopy far below, the mist rising from the river. Your brain registers movement and stillness simultaneously, and the combination creates a floating sensation that passengers describe as dreamlike and nauseating in equal measure. Below the bridge, the gorge holds natural caves, waterfalls, and dense tropical vegetation that has never been cleared. The ecosystem beneath the viaduct is effectively untouched, partly because the terrain is too steep and too remote for human access. Myanmar's rail authority inspects the bridge regularly, but replacement is not currently possible. No budget exists for a structure this massive in this location. The viaduct continues to carry daily train service because shutting it down would sever the only rail connection between Mandalay and the Shan Plateau. A 120-year-old bridge held together by hand-driven rivets, carrying daily trains 335 feet above a jungle gorge. If it fails, there is no detour and no rescue access from below. Stories like this don't get covered by most travel channels. If you want content that goes deeper than surface level lists, subscribing to Explore Danger is the move. Death Railway, Thailand, Myanmar. Each mile of completed track on the Death Railway costs approximately 400 human lives. That figure is not metaphor. It is a calculated ratio derived from the roughly 100,000 forced laborers and prisoners of war who died during the 258-mile construction between Thailand and Myanmar during World War II. The Japanese Imperial Army ordered the railway built in 1942 to supply forces in Burma. The timeline was impossible. A route through dense jungle, over rivers, and across unstable limestone mountains, completed in just 15 months. The workforce included approximately 60,000 Allied prisoners of war and over 200,000 Asian forced laborers. Disease, starvation, brutality, and construction accidents killed them at a pace that averaged dozens of deaths per day. Where machinery could not reach, thousands of elephants hauled timber, steel, and stone through mud and monsoon rain. Workers carved ledges into cliff faces with hand tools. Bridges were built over raging rivers using logs and human muscle. The most famous structure, the bridge over the River Kwai, became a symbol of the entire project's human cost. Today, the Myanmar side of the line is largely abandoned, damaged by decades of war and neglect. But the Thai section from Nam Tok to Kanchanaburi still operates, carrying tourists along the same route, where the death toll once exceeded the population of a small city. Riding the train, you pass through limestone cuttings where the rock walls still show tool marks from hand-carved excavation. The jungle has reclaimed much of the surrounding terrain, but the rail bed itself, built on a foundation of human suffering, remains clear and in use. Steep terrain and soft limestone create ongoing landslide risk, especially during monsoon season. Sections of cliff-hugging tracks shift and crack as the geology slowly rejects the infrastructure forced into it 80 years ago. The Death Railway is not a historical artifact. It is an active rail line where tourists ride on tracks laid by people who did not survive to see them completed. A railway where 400 lives were lost per mile is not entertainment. It is documented history. If you believe these stories deserve careful, respectful telling, a share puts it in front of someone who will feel the same way. Landwasser Viaduct, Switzerland. 6 stone arches rise 213 feet above the Landwasser River Gorge in the Swiss Alps, each one faced with locally quarried limestone that has held its form for 122 years. The Landwasser Viaduct is the signature structure of the Albula Railway, a UNESCO World Heritage Route and one of the most beautiful train journeys on Earth. The bridge's most striking design feature is its ending. The curved viaduct does not transition to flat ground. It runs directly into a vertical rock wall and connects immediately to the Landwasser Tunnel. From the outside, the train appears to bend across the gorge and then vanish straight into the mountain without slowing down. The curved radius is only 328 feet. At 213 feet of height, passengers on the inside of the curve can look out the window and see the rear cars of their own train leaning behind them, as if the locomotive is chasing its own tail across the sky. Trains cross this section at only 6 to 9 miles per hour. That speed is a structural requirement, not a scenic courtesy. The combination of tight radius, extreme height, and century-old masonry means any excess speed generates lateral forces the stone arches were not designed to absorb. Standing below the viaduct, the scale hits differently. The arches are enormous, each one wider than a house. The limestone blocks are fitted so precisely that after more than a century of alpine freezing, thawing, and thermal cycling, the mortar joints remain intact. No steel reinforcement was used. The bridge holds purely through the geometry of its arches and the weight of its own stone. For photographers, the few seconds when the train bends across the bridge at low speed create one of the most recognizable railway images in the world. For passengers, those same few seconds produce a sensation of leaning into open air 213 feet above a river they cannot see, only hear. Stone gravity and geometry. No steel cables, no modern reinforcement, and it has carried trains for 122 years without structural failure. The Landwasser trusts stone and geometry. The railway ahead trusts something far less stable. A vertical cliff face in a tropical rainforest where yellow fever once killed more workers than construction itself. Curitiba-Serra do Mar Railway, Brazil. European engineers looked at the Serra do Mar escarpment in southern Brazil and refused the job. The terrain drops from over 2,953 feet to near sea level in a horizontal distance, so short that laying conventional track was considered physically impossible. The Curitiba Railway was built anyway, and it earned the nickname Death Sentence before the first train ever ran. Construction began in the 1880s and consumed more than 9,000 workers. Many died from tunnel collapses, falls into ravines, and blasting accidents. But the biggest killer was yellow fever, which spread through the dense Atlantic rainforest, where work camps were set up with no medical infrastructure and no understanding of mosquito-borne transmission. The finish line threads through 14 granite tunnels and crosses multiple bridges bolted directly to vertical rock faces. In several sections, the distance between the rail and the cliff edge measures less than a car width. The track was not laid on a surface. It was pinned to a wall. The descent is the critical engineering challenge. Within a few hours, the train drops nearly 3,000 feet. Any brake failure on this grade would produce a runaway with almost no survivable outcome. The curves are tight, the tunnels are narrow, and the rock walls on both sides leave zero room for a derailed car to go anywhere except over the edge. From the train window, solid ground effectively disappears. The view cycles relentlessly between tunnel darkness, open gorge, cliff wall, and canopy far below. The Atlantic forest, one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth, fills every gap the rock does not. During heavy rain, which is frequent in this region, waterfalls pour directly across the tracks. Rockfalls block tunnel entrances. Landslides erase sections of rail bed. Maintenance crews work continuously during rainy season to keep the route passable. The engineers who refused to build it were not wrong about the danger. They were wrong only in believing that danger would stop the project. It didn't. The railway has run through this granite wall for over 130 years. The Serra do Mar proved a railway could be bolted to a cliff. But what about a bridge so high it took a decade to hold the world record? A U-shaped gorge crossed at 920 feet above the river below.